at my son Ryan's Stanford MBA graduation. After I'd worked 3 double shifts to pay for the flight and a motel room, he stood at the podium and thanked everyone who made him who he is today. His glamorous stepmother, Kimberly, his father David, his professors, his mentors, everyone except me. So I stood up quietly, my polyester dress feeling cheap and loud in the sea of silk and linen, and walked down the aisle while he was still speaking. I left the sun-drenched auditorium without a word. My life savings? $300,000. Built over 25 years of 12-hour nursing shifts. Hovered in my mind. The education fund I'd started the day Ryan was born. I'd contributed to it every single month. Without fail. Even when his father David left me for a younger, wealthier woman. Even when my hospital faced budget cuts. Even when I had to choose between new tires for my 10-year-old car or a weekend off, I remembered the long nights, the aching feet, the smell of antiseptic that clung to my hair. I remembered missing holidays to cover shifts so a younger nurse could be with her family. I remembered tutoring Ryan in biology at our small kitchen table after a graveyard shift, my eyes gritty with exhaustion. I remembered patching my own scrubs to save money. Shopping at thrift stores. My one luxury, a good pair of comfortable work shoes. Every single sacrifice was a brick in the foundation of this day. And in his moment of triumph, my son took a wrecking ball to that foundation. He stood on that stage, a polished product of my grit and Kimberly's gloss, and chose the gloss. He smiled at Kimberly, the branding CEO who'd swooped in 5 years ago with a checkbook and a vocabulary full of words like synergy and optics. She taught him which forks to use, which brands to wear, and apparently, which parent to erase. He never once looked my way. He never acknowledged the woman who'd held his head over a toilet when he had the flu, who'd worked overtime to pay for his first computer, who'd believed in him when he was just a kid with scraped knees and a dream. Not a brand to be managed. In his eyes, and in the eyes of that entire audience, I was a ghost, an architect of a life he now credited to someone else. And as I walked out into the California sunshine, I decided he was right. It was time for this ghost to disappear. My phone buzzed relentlessly as I sat in the sterile quiet of my motel room. The congratulatory balloons I'd bought now looking like mocking, colorful tumors. I ignored the calls from Ryan, from my ex-husband David. I knew what they wanted. An explanation, an apology for my scene, an opportunity to smooth over the awkwardness so their perfect day could continue untarnished. But the truth was, this wasn't sudden. It was the final, public confirmation of a slow poisoning that had been happening for years. After David married Kimberly, Ryan's visits home became less frequent. The stories he told were no longer about his friends or classes, but about Kimberly's celebrity clients, about networking events on yachts, about a world where my life seemed impossibly small. It was Kimberly who insisted he get a new car, a European model, to project the right image. It was Kimberly who hired a consultant to polish his university applications. I had just provided the raw material, the decades of hard work that got him to the starting line. She was the one who applied the final, expensive varnish. Finally, I answered Ryan's call. His voice wasn't apologetic, it was annoyed. "Mom." "What was that?" "You embarrassed me." "You embarrassed Kimberly." I took a breath. "You erased me." "Ryan, you stood on that stage and pretended I didn't exist." A sigh of exasperation on his end. "Oh, come on." Kimberly helped me craft that speech. It was about branding, about presenting a narrative of success. She said that dwelling on struggle doesn't inspire confidence. It's not a good look. There it was, the poisoned well. For years, she had been systematically reframing my love, my sacrifice, as a liability. My quiet, steady support was struggle. My fiscal prudence was mediocrity. My life as a nurse, a life of service and tangible value, was just a bad story that didn't fit his new, aspirational brand. So I'm a bad look. Ryan, the 25 years I poured into you, that's just a story you'd rather not tell. It's not personal. Mom, it's strategy, he said, parroting a line I was sure he'd heard 1,000 times. Kimberly says, you have to curate your past to build your future. She's the expert. He didn't get it. He saw his life as a product to be launched. And I was the unglamorous backstory, being edited out in the final cut. His words didn't break my heart anymore. They hardened it. The conversation with Ryan was a cold, clarifying slap in the face. It wasn't just an oversight, it was a philosophy. My son had been taught to see my love as a debit on his social ledger. Sitting in that generic motel room, surrounded by the faint smell of bleach, I felt a strange sense of power. The grief was still there, but now it had a purpose. I was no longer a victim of his narrative. I was the editor of my own. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. The $300,000 sat there, a testament to a lifetime of deferred dreams and relentless discipline. The account was named Ryan's Future. I clicked the button to rename it A Worthy Investment. My first transfer was small, almost surgical. $24,000. Manietza, Madison, my sister's daughter, was a brilliant, compassionate kid in her final year of social work school. She worked 2 jobs to make ends meet and was terrified of the debt she was accumulating. She wanted to help foster kids, to pour her life into the most vulnerable, but she was worried she'd be crushed by loans before she could even start. I sent the money directly to her student loan provider, an anonymous payment. She didn't need to know it was me. She just needed to be free. It was a quiet act of justice, a rebalancing of the scales. A small portion of this fortune, built on sacrifice, would now fund a future dedicated to it. Then, I turned to the remaining $276,000. I thought about my late husband, Michael. He wasn't a CEO. He was a paramedic. He spent 30 years seeing people on the worst days of their lives, and he met every single one with grace and competence. He believed that the value of a life was measured in the comfort you give, not the wealth you accumulate. I navigated to my old nursing school's website, to the section on endowments. I found the form to establish a new scholarship. I typed in his name, the Michael Davis Memorial Scholarship for Nursing Excellence. It would be a full-ride scholarship, awarded each year to a student who demonstrated not just academic merit, but profound compassion. I typed in the amount. The cursor blinked. Then I transferred every last cent. The screen confirmed the transaction. My life savings, gone. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, deeply wealthy. 2 weeks later, I was back in my small apartment. The quiet rhythm of my life restored. I had returned the rental car, unpacked my small suitcase, and gone back to work. The Stanford graduation felt like a scene from a movie I'd watched about someone else's life. My phone rang one afternoon. It was my niece, Madison. Her voice choked with tears. I thought something was wrong. Aunt Jessica. She sobbed. You're not going to believe this. Someone paid off my student loans. All of them. $24,000. It's just gone. I feigned surprise, letting her tell me the whole story. The official letter she'd received, the disbelief, the sheer, life-altering relief. She could now take an unpaid internship at the city's best child advocacy center, her future. Once, a tightrope walk over a canyon of debt was now an open field. I don't know who did it, she said, her voice filled with a gratitude so pure it almost hurt to hear. But it feels like a miracle. Hanging up, a profound sense of peace washed over me. The money was already doing what it was meant to do, creating freedom, enabling compassion, honoring the true meaning of investment. That evening, as I was making dinner, a news alert flashed across the bottom of the television screen. The headline was stark. Branding CEO Kimberly St. Rording Boulos. James investigated for massive fraud. He dropped my knife. The report was devastating. Her agency, Aura Brand Management, was allegedly a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. She had been bilking investors for millions, creating a glittering facade of success built on lies and stolen money. The SEC had frozen all her assets. Federal agents had raided her gleaming corporate offices. The glass house my son had been so eager to move into had just shattered into a million pieces. The news report showed footage of Ryan's graduation, used as an example of Kimberly's high-profile networking. There he was, at the podium, praising her leadership, thanking her for showing him what success looks like. The irony was acidic. His new world, the one he had chosen over me, wasn't just hollow, it was criminal. The life he had traded his mother for was a sham. I knew my phone would ring again soon. But this time, the voice on the other end wouldn't be annoyed or dismissive. It would be desperate. He didn't call. He showed up. 3 days later, my doorbell rang at 10 o'clock at night. I looked through the peephole and saw Ryan, looking like a ghost of the polished man from the graduation stage. His designer suit was rumpled. His hair was a mess, and his face was pale with panic. I opened the door. He didn't even say hello. He just stumbled in, his bravado completely gone. "Mom, I need your help." The power in the room had shifted so completely it was almost a physical force. Here, in my small, humble apartment. He was the one who was powerless. The world of private jets and luxury brands had spit him out, and he had come crawling back to the place he'd tried so hard to erase. "My job offer is gone," he said, his voice cracking. "The company doesn't exist anymore. Kimberly's lawyers aren't returning my calls. Dad's trying to distance himself from the whole mess. Her assets are frozen. Everything is gone." He finally looked at me, his eyes wide with a terror I hadn't seen since he was a little boy, afraid of the dark. "The fund, Mom. The $300,000. I need it. I have nothing. I was counting on it to get an apartment, to live on until I find something else. I need it." He said it not as a request, but as a demand, as if it were still his, just waiting for him to claim it. I sat down at my small kitchen table and gestured for him to sit opposite me. I was completely calm. My anger had burned away, leaving behind a hard, clear certainty. That money is gone. "Ryan," his face crumpled in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Gone. Where did it go? I gave it away," I said, my voice even, and quiet. $24,000 paid off your cousin Madison's student loans. She's going to spend her life helping abused children, free from the burden of debt. The rest, $276,000. I used to establish a full-ride nursing scholarship in your grandfather Michael's name. It will fund the education of students who want to dedicate their lives to helping others, people who understand the value of service." He stared at me, uncomprehending. You gave my money away? It was never your money." "Ryan, it was my life. It was my sacrifice. And you stood on that stage and told the whole world it was worthless. You chose a brand over your family. Well, the brand went bankrupt. You chose the shiny, hollow thing. And this is the consequence. The real investment, the one built on love and hard work, I gave it to people who would be grateful." 6 months later, Ryan was living in a small basement apartment back in Columbus, a few miles from my place. The glamorous Stanford MBA was working at a local bookstore, stocking shelves and making just enough to cover his rent and the minimum payments on his student loans. He sold the fancy car Kimberly had bought him. His designer clothes were replaced by jeans and simple t-shirts. The fall from grace had been brutal, but it had also been grounding. He was humbled. We had dinner together every Sunday. At first, it was awkward. There were long silences filled with the things we couldn't say. But slowly, we started to talk again. Not about branding or networking, but about books, about my patients at the hospital, about the simple, everyday things that make up a life. He told me about the shame, about seeing former classmates post about their 6-figure consulting jobs while he was alphabetizing the fiction section. He told me he'd started volunteering at a soup kitchen on Saturdays. He was learning what it felt like to give without expecting anything in return. One evening, as we were clearing the dishes, he stopped and looked at me. "You know," he said, his voice quiet, "at Stanford, they taught us all about building things. Companies, portfolios, brands. But they never taught us about what happens when it all falls apart. They never taught us what's underneath." He paused, handing me a plate. You're what's underneath. Mom, you were always the foundation, the real architect. I was just too stupid and dazzled by the fancy decorations to see it. Forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a slow, quiet process, like the healing of a deep wound. But in that moment, I felt it begin. I hadn't taken his money away to punish him. I had done it to save him. I had saved him, not from poverty, but from a poverty of character. I had forced him to learn the difference between price and value. Last week, I received the first letter from the inaugural recipient of the Michael Davis Memorial Scholarship, a young man who had been a caretaker for his sick mother for years, now finally able to pursue his dream of becoming an oncology nurse. I read the letter to Ryan. He didn't say anything, but I saw the tears in his eyes. He understood. My son was finally home, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because he finally knew where he belonged, and I had found my peace. Not in revenge, but in the quiet satisfaction of a true investment finally paying its dividend.